All right, let's discuss connectivity to AWS. You can watch this video on your own. You can pause this one, videos in the slides, of course. But let's go ahead and pick up right after. So you watch that intro video. So one of the first services that they mentioned is Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC for short. It's a service that allows you to create a private, isolated network within AWS. So you're running your application, right? You have resources, you have data running through your app. Uh, you're sharing AWS Cloud with millions and millions of different organizations, right? Users, etc. Sometimes you want to tie in up security, access, traffic, and you can do this by kind of cutting out your own section of the AWS cloud and making your own virtual private cloud. So you're making your own smaller subsection of AWS that only you have access to, only you have control over. So you can decide, the policies of what comes in and what goes out. So it's similar to a traditional data center, right? Like if you had an on-premises data center, but it's running in the cloud. So you still have that, the power of on-premises virtualized through the cloud. So there are millions of customers who use AWS services and millions of resources that these customers have created. For example, EC2 instances. It's important that you create boundaries around all these resources. So networking is an important concept, right? So that you protect your little area of the cloud. So network traffic would be able to flow between them unrestricted if you didn't set up these boundaries. And that would be really bad, right? You don't want your customer data to be transferring to other AWS users. So you can use Amazon VPC to establish those boundaries around your AWS resources. Remember, virtual private cloud, you're kind of getting a little piece of the cloud and making it your own. So Amazon VPC enables you to create your own isolated section of the AWS cloud. In turn, helps you secure traffic to and from your applications. You can launch resources in a virtual network that you define. Some of the different components that make VPCs work in the way they're supposed to include subnets. We'll talk subnets, gateways, and AWS Direct Connect. So what is a gateway? An internet gateway is a connection between a virtual private cloud and the internet. So it's a bridge, right, between your own secured virtual network, your little piece of the cloud, and the public internet. So it allows public traffic from the internet to access your VPC. So you actually have to create an opening for that public traffic to enter your private cloud. So you can attach an internet gateway to the VPC. You can think of an internet gateway as being similar to a doorway that customers use to enter the coffee shop, right? Going back to the analogy. Without the gateway, no one outside that cloud, right? No resources or services existing outside that virtual private cloud won't be able to access the resources in the cloud. So what if you want your VPC to be private? So got to fix that to help secure those resources. So yeah, maybe you don't want a gateway right to the public internet. Maybe you want it to be private. But here's an example before we talk about the private one. So there's an internet gateway icon here, right? And that's the bridge between your VPC and the public internet right here. So the gateway icon is attached to a VPC. Here we have it on the right that holds 3 EC2 instances. An arrow connects the client to the gateway over the internet. So the client, right, would be a customer, for example, trying to access information from your app. So your app exists in this nice secured VPC, but some resources, right, you do want to send to your customers. You don't want everything to be private. So that's where an internet gateway comes in. So client sends a request through the internet and into the VPC, made possible through this gateway. What if you want to go private, right? What if you want some resources to not be accessible to the broader public internet? You would use a virtual private gateway. So a virtual private gateway, or you could say VPG for short, is an AWS network component that allows your private network to securely connect to an Amazon VPC over the internet. So in this case, you don't want just anyone on the internet to access those resources, to access your application data. You only want a particular network, and for the most part, it might be your business's on-premises computers, right? Maybe you have an office location, and you need to have access to your remotely hosted EC2 instance on the virtual private cloud, right? So you have your EC2 instance. It's in the AWS cloud. It's not in the public AWS cloud, right? Because we've minimized it down to a virtual private cloud, right? A little piece of the AWS cloud. And you only want your business computers to connect to it. You got to use a virtual private gateway. So, internet gateway for everybody on the internet, virtual private gateway is going to make it, it's going to facilitate the connection to a specific on premise network. So, a private network, for example, might be an on premises data center or an internal corporate network. I can tell you, working as an engineer, we had our own corporate network to make sure, right, that outside attackers or outside users, right, weren't having easy access to our data because we're working with really sensitive government secrets. So a virtual private gateway allows traffic into the VPC only if it's coming from an approved network. So again, that could be your corporate network, or it could be a data center that's on premises. The point is, it's a connection to a private network. So that's going to be a virtual private gateway. Private networks, if you want the public network that we call the internet, then you would just use a good old-fashioned internet gateway. All right, so this is how a virtual private gateway would work. So rather than having our client here on the left, we still have our VPC on the right. So this is where our application is hosted. In this case, we have some databases. We want to establish a connection between our virtual private cloud and our corporate data center, right? Our private network. To make this possible, we're going to use a VPG, or virtual private network. So this VPN connection works like a bodyguard for your network connection. So it's going to encrypt or protect. So encryption, it's a technique in which you can't really see the data that's traveling. It's kind of mumbled jumbled in a way so that outside attackers won't be able to understand, right, what the data is actually that's being transmitted actually is. So it's encrypted. It encrypts all the traffic from other sources of requests. The virtual private gateway allows your virtual private network to enter the AWS virtual private cloud. So again, all you need to remember is if you need to make a connection between your little piece of the AWS cloud and your private network here, you're going to need to use a virtual private gateway, not just a good old-fashioned internet gateway. All right, so let's talk another way to connect, and that's going to be AWS Direct Connect. So it's a service that allows you to establish a dedicated private network connection between your on-premises data center and the AWS cloud. So this service is a virtual private gateway service. So it's going to allow you to make that connection. So you don't have to, provision this connection yourself. You can use AWS Direct Connect. So the private connection that AWS Direct Connect provides helps you to reduce network costs and increase the amount of bandwidth that you can travel through your network. So AWS has a solution for everything. You want to connect your VPC to your corporate data center, just go ahead and use AWS Direct Connect. It can save you a lot of money. So corporate data center routes network traffic to an AWS Direct Connect location. That traffic is going to go to the VPC through virtual private gateway. All network traffic between the corporate data center and VPC flows through this dedicated private connection. Private connection means it's encrypted, it's secured, it's not accessible to outside users, right? And specifically, in a lot of cases, to like those outside attackers. Got to protect that data. So how does it work? So you request a direct connect connection through the AWS console. AWS will provision a dedicated fiber link between your data center and AWS Direct Connection. So there's actual physical resources that AWS is handling for you. You set up a virtual interface to connect to AWS services or your VPC, and then traffic directly flows between your network and AWS, bypassing the public internet. So you don't have to know every single detail, right, of how it works. Just know that AWS Direct Connect is not going to make your resources public. It's going to make them private. It's going to allow you to connect your on-premises data center directly to your little piece of the cloud, the virtual private cloud. All right. let's go ahead. In the next video, we'll talk subnets and access.